All right, welcome. We got a video here from Chuck Misler from back in 2003. The Cosmic Codes. This is very interesting. If you haven't actually seen this, you're really missing out. And if you don't already know who Chuck Misler is, you're really missing out because I'll tell you what. He his knowledge of the Bible and his in-depth look into the Bible is just absolutely astounding. Um, I could babble on here for hours, but anyway, let's get this going, and you'll see what I mean. And all you who are already Chuck Misler fans, good for you. Good for you. He's the one who really reopened my eyes to Jesus Christ, and I really thank God for him because I this hit me like nothing else did. You just gotta see this.
Many of you, of course, wondering what on earth are these beads. You see, I wear these beads to make our host nervous, you see. But actually, there's a story behind them, as you probably guessed. A very strange thing happened to me. I had spilled on the floor a whole bunch of black and white beads. And I picked them up randomly, put them on a thread. And after I did that, I was startled to realize that just by sheer accident, it actually in Morse code spells out. There's a did it, that's an I, dash dot, that's N, in, and then there's a T, H, and E, the. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Now, in Morse code. Now, how many of you believe that this assembly of 347 beads happened by accident? Any hands? You see, instinctively, you know I'm putting you on by suggesting this was accidental. Actually, I'm a radio ham, so it was easy, but the point is, this took some planning, and it was diligence. And for you to believe that this was by accident, of course, is absurd. Now, you may not have done the math, but it happens there's an alphabet of 2, black and white, so it happens to be 2 to the 304, and there's 347 beads, so it's 2 to the 347th power, which in decimal is 3 times 10 with 104 zeros after it. Now, in the field of physics, a probability that would involve 10 with 50 zeros or more is defined as absurd. In other words, mathematically, you would argue that there's no such thing as a probability of 0 or 1. Everything's in between those boundaries. But when a probability gets so small as to be literally negligible, they cut it off. For mathematical reasons, you need a cutoff. So 10 to the 50th, 10 to the minus 50th is defined in physics as absurd. So this is 10, not with 50, with 104 zeros. So this is obviously, you instinctively realize it's absurd to consider that these 347 black and white beads assembled themselves somehow in spelling out Genesis 1:1 and more.
You know, Chuck Misler wasn't just a Bible scholar and teacher. He was CEO for Western Digital Corporation, a hard drive company, and he had a position at Ford Motor Company too. I'm not absolutely sure it was CEO, but he was top notch there too. Not to mention, he had went to the Naval Academy, I believe it was, and he worked for our U.S. government too for a while. Yeah, he's just an amazing man, and the depths he goes to figure these things out are just absolutely amazing. And he has books where it's all written out. This is not just some far-fetched theory. I mean, he actually knows what he's talking about. It's just absolutely amazing. Anyway,
Morse code. And yet, we let them teach our kids that we happened by accident. And we'll be talking a little bit about that because what we're going to be doing today is something a little unusual. You know, we often hear talks about science in the Bible from the point of view of physics, because there's much in physics that's dramatic and fun, And the only people really, all the fields of science are, the only people really confused are the biologists on the evolution thing. I'll stay off that. But very few people really are familiar with the field of information sciences, which gives us, of course, communication and many other of our features in our culture. That happens to be my specialization. I thought it'd be interesting to really take a look at what this field of specialized study has to say about the Scripture. And you'll find it, I think, provocative. Now, we're going to have 3 sessions. This will be the first of 3, in which I'm going to, if you'll just bear with me, give you a little bit of introduction into the field of cryptography, the art of secret writing. There have been a lot of books published in recent years about the so-called Bible codes. And the tragedy of that field is it's been abused badly both by its enthusiasts as well as its detractors. The truth lies between those 2 extremes. And virtually everyone writing in that field has no background in the field that it's dealing with, and that's cryptography. So I'm going to share with you a few things about that as a prelude to some discoveries that I think you'll find extremely interesting. And the very idea that there are hidden messages in the Bible is a shock to many. Not just unbelievers, but many believers are offended or disturbed by that possibility. And yet we'll discover that it's actually quite scriptural and has some exciting benefits to all of us. And so we'll, now I've told you about what I call my mystery beads here, and the real question I usually introduce an audience with is, how good a scientist are you? Did you buy that hypothesis? And of course, the whole idea that these beads happen by chance is patently absurd. Now, could this be chance? No, definitely design. And I mentioned there's 347 beads, only 2 types, black and white, which by random chance would be approximately 3 times 10 with 104 zeros after it. And 10 to the 50th is absurd. So we went through all that. You see, our whole ministry is based, just to give a little background for those of you that may not know us that well, our ministry is based on 2 discoveries. The first is that these 66 books that we glibly call the Bible, even though they were penned by over 40 different guys over the better part of about 2,000 years, they're an integrated message. And I don't mean thematically, that there's a theme in the old fulfilled in the new. No, far more than that. That every detail, every number, every place name is there by deliberate design in the original. So that's
There's no mistakes in the Bible. People misinterpret what's being said or take it out of context, but there are no mistakes. There are grammatical mistakes, translation mistakes that have recently shown that when they went back and really looked at how the Jewish people in the Torah interpreted things in English, they got a few things wrong, even in the King James. So, but other than that, if it's being talked about in the Word, I can guarantee you it's truth. There's no contradictions like people say there are. And this guy right here has nailed all of that. It's just absolutely amazing just to hear him speak about it. Enough of me. Back to Chuck.
the first thing, that we have an integrated message system in our laps and once you discover its integration, you need to do that for yourself, and we'll show you some things. The second discovery emerges from that, and that is that the origin of this integrated message system had to come from outside our time domain. Literally, we're in possession of a message system of extraterrestrial origin, and you can prove that, and we'll show you how. And one integrated sign. The New Testament is in the Old Testament concealed, and the Old Testament is in the New Testament revealed. You know, it's interesting when you finish the Old Testament to realize that you've got a collection of books that have unappeased longings, unfulfilled prophecies, and so on. And it's incomplete without the new. They go together in great ways. But hidden treasures in the biblical text. Are there such things as hidden messages in the Bible? You know, the Bible says so. One example is Proverbs 25:2. It is the glory of God to conceal a thing and the honor or duty of kings to search out a matter. And that's what we're about. We'll take a look at some of these. Now I'm going to give you a riddle. This is just to get started. Who is the oldest man in the Bible? Anyone? Methuselah, sure. He lived 969 years, yet he died before his father. How can he be the oldest man in the Bible who died before his father? Anyone?
Oh, you gotta wait for this.
His father was what? Enoch. Good for you. Everybody forgets who his father was. He was Enoch.
Yeah.
Enoch's an interesting guy. The oldest prophecy in the Bible, uttered by a prophet, is a prophecy of the second coming of Jesus Christ, and it was uttered before the flood of Noah. That itself is kind of interesting. But Enoch, at the age when he was 65 years old, had an experience that altered the rest of his life. For 300 years following, he walked with God, whatever that means. He also was given a prophecy. You see, the flood of Noah did not come as a surprise. The flood of Noah had been preached on for 4 generations. But Methuselah was told that when his son was born, that as long as his son is alive, the judgment of the flood would be withheld. And therefore he names him Methuselah.
This is mind-bending stuff. If you haven't heard this already, this pay attention, because this is absolutely mind-blowing. When I heard him talk about this years and years ago, I just couldn't stop listening. The way Chuck just brings it all to life. And you know, according to Chuck, no matter how many times he's read the Bible, every time he reads a story in it, even if he's read it 1,000 times, which he probably has, he gets something new out of it every single time. Absolutely amazing. Anyway, here we go.
And the word Methuselah comes from 2 Hebrew roots. One is muth. It's a root which means death. It's used 125 times in the Old Testament. And the verb shalach, which means to bring or send forth. His death will send forth, is really what the name means. And if you do your homework, his death shall bring. The year of the flood, Methuselah was 187 when he had a son by the name of Lamech, and Lamech was 182 when Noah was born, and everybody knows that it was the 600th year of Noah, the flood came. In other words, the year that Methuselah died was indeed the year that the flood came. His life was a prophecy. And that's why it's provocative to realize that he also has the longest lifetime in the Bible, because his lifetime then becomes, in effect, symbolic of God's mercy. But by the way, girls, can you imagine raising that kid? Every time he caught a cold, the entire neighborhood would go into panic, right? Well, if there's all this meaning hidden behind the name Methuselah, what about the other 9 guys in Genesis 5? You know, Genesis 5 is one of those strange, people say, what's your favorite book of prophecy? Chapter in prophecy, I'll say Genesis 5. That surprises people, because you don't think of that as a book of prophecy. First couple of chapters of Genesis, the creation, hey, that's rich stuff. There's a lot of fun there. Genesis 3, that's the seed plot of the entire Bible. Every doctrine of the Bible has its roots in Genesis 3. And Genesis 4, the first murder, we all know the story. From Genesis 6 on, we have the flood of Noah and all that action. Genesis 5 is one of those chapters you tend to sort of skip over. I mean, just a genealogy from Adam to Noah, 10 guys. And the problem with Genesis 5 is that it's not translated for you. The rest of the Bible is translated into English or whatever language you're comfortable with. And but we don't translate proper names. Even in Strong's Lexicon or whatever, you don't find proper names dealt with. But every Hebrew word is based on 3-letter roots, and if you know the roots, you can infer the basic meaning of the words. And I'll come back to that before we're through. We're going to discover some very, very intriguing things about the Hebrew language before we're through. But the point is, part of our problem is we don't know what those names mean. My formal legal name is Charles. What does Charles mean? There's all kinds of speculations. No one really knows. There's just conjectures. And your own name, very likely, the meaning of it has been lost in antiquity. Well, let's take a look at this, the genealogy of Genesis 5. Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Yared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah. 10 guys. Well, let's take a look at this. Adam, of course, pretty easy. What does Adam mean? It comes from Adamah. It means what? Man. That's pretty straightforward. And when Adam and Eve had their son, they named him with a root that means appointed. In fact, Eve even says so in the chapter before, Genesis 4:25. Eve said, "For God hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew." It always fascinates me. People always ask, where did Cain get his wife? I don't know why that's such a popular question. You know, obviously, Cain married his sister because he was able. Huh?
That's
Anyway,
funny.
we'll move on. Obviously, they had a bunch of. They had a son by the name of Enosh. Now, Enosh comes from a root which means mortal, frail, or miserable. It comes from the root anash, which means to be incurable. It's used of a wound or grief, sickness, or wickedness. So it really means mortal. So now, and that's got a tough name to go through school with. Mortal, you know, whatever. His son he named Kenan. Now, in some Bibles, it's translated Canaan. It's not Aramaic, it's Hebrew. And the Kenites were a tribe. In fact, Balaam in Numbers 24, I think it is, makes a pun on their name, the Kenites. The word Kenan comes from a root which means sorrow or dirge or elegy. That's also a rough label to go through school with. You're going to choose up a rugby team. Hey, sorrow, you're on our side. You know, it doesn't work really well. So he apparently, when he had a son, had enough of this. He gave his son a very unusual name, rather a mouthful, but a wonderful name, Mahalalel, which means the Mahal, which means the blessed or praised one, and El, the name of God. Mahalalel is the praised God or the blessed God. That's pretty neat. And he has a son by the name of Yared, which is a verb, which means shall come down. And I won't get into the conjectures surrounding this. Our time is short. We'll keep moving here. But we have then, of course, he has a son by the name of Enoch. Now, we've talked about Enoch, but what does his name mean? It turns out it's an academic term meaning commencement or teaching. And he, of course, has a son by the name of Methuselah, which we've already pointed out means his death shall bring. And that is, of course, the year the flood came, and it's a fulfillment of prophecy. He has a son by the name of Lamech. Now, here's a root that we still retain in our English language, the word lament or lamentation. And but it comes from a root meaning despairing. And he has a son by the name of Noah. How many of you have heard of Noah? Can I see a show of hands? About 2/3. That's kind of where trouble here, right? I'm kidding, of course. Now, Noah is just a two-letter root. It's derived from Nacham, which means to bring relief or comfort. In fact, Lamech, his father, indicates that's why he named him Noah, because in Genesis 5:29, it says he called his name Noah, saying, "The same shall comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands," and so on. So, okay, we have the genealogy. Adam, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Yared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah. 10 guys. But
Yeah, years ago when I first got into the Bible, the genealogy was like, it seemed like the most boring part. And I kept telling myself, why is all this in here? And I would ask around and people would tell me, you know, it's to show the line of God's people and where they all came from. And I mean, I got it, but I really didn't understand the point of it. And I tell you, Chuck Missler just brings all this to the surface. He was an amazing man. He's passed away now, if you didn't already know, but he left behind hundreds of videos, if not thousands, of little snippets too, not to mention full-length videos of all his work. It's just absolutely mind-bending and astounding. You can watch his videos over and over, and it's just like he had said about the Bible. You almost get something different out of it every time. You just got to pay attention.
now we have enough background to take a crack at translating that genealogy. Man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down, teaching that his death shall bring the despairing comfort or rest. And every time I do this, I get goosebumps. Man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down, teaching that his death, whose death? God's death, shall bring the despairing comfort or rest. Now this little insight to me is precious for several reasons. You have here a simple one-sentence summary of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And it also indicates that God's plan of redemption was not a knee-jerk reaction because Adam surprised him by falling. God knew from the beginning he would and had a plan in his mind to deal with it. But there's also a pragmatic aspect of this. There's no way you'll ever convince me that a group of Jewish rabbis contrived to hide a summary of the Christian gospel in a genealogy in their highly venerated Torah, books of Moses? No way. So I think this is provocative. It's a good beginning. One integrated design. The New Testament is in the Old Testament concealed in more ways than we could possibly enumerate if we had a month to do it. And the Old Testament is in the New Testament, of course, revealed. So what I want to do now, in order to fully appreciate some of the places we're going to be going together, I'd like to give you a little background in a technology that most of us probably have not had any serious exposure to. We're going to introduce you a little bit to secret writing, cryptography, and what that's all about. And codes, of course, in literature, we're all familiar with that. It was very prominent. Edgar Allan Poe's famous Goldbug novel. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle had Sherlock Holmes involved 3 times with codes. Most conspicuous one, The Adventure of the Dancing Men, these little stick figures that Sherlock figured out was actually a form of secret writing and so on. Carl Sagan's recent novel and movie involved a code that was 3-dimensional and so forth. So codes are obviously a part of our literature, but it's also key award, the Germany's Enigma. Which from Albert's cipher disks to Cardano's AutoKey was derived from those things. We'll talk about that in a minute. And the American code, Black, in October 23 of 1942. It was cracked, or made so it couldn't be cracked. Before El Alamein, we had no victories. After El Alamein, we had no defeats, Churchill pointed out. And so what's hidden behind that is the art of the code breakers. And Project Ultra. Turing here in Britain and von Neumann in the United States conspired together to develop our computer industry, the roots of it, which many people don't realize the primary drive was these machines to crack these codes, which of course they did do. And of course in the Pacific, the magic was a victory over Japan's purple, these codes, which we actually knew, but no one would believe that we had the day and the hour Pearl Harbor, but nobody would listen. There's a very dramatic background behind that. But let's keep going. When you start talking about secret writing, there's 2 major segments of it. One is steganography. That's the art of secret writing in the sense of invisible inks and hiding the message in the first place. We're not going to deal with that. That's peripheral to our interest. We're going to talk a little bit about cryptography, and we'll distinguish between codes and ciphers. Codes in the field refer to arbitrary designations.
See, Chuck goes deep. You think you know about the Bible, but until you watch one of his videos and see how deep of dive he's gone and he goes, well, I should say he went, it's just mind-boggling. I mean, this guy's IQ is off the charts anyway, and most intelligent people think they know more than God himself. That's why they don't even believe in God. They think they got it all figured out. And the deeper Chuck dove into this, the more he discovered. The more he discovered, the more he looked. Absolutely amazing.
Where you might have the number 347 mean a battleship, whatever. Arbitrary definitions without the code book, you're useless. In Paul Revere's Ride, the Old North Church, the lantern, 1 by land, 2 by sea. If the British had had the most advanced Cray computers, they could not have broken that code because there's no way to break it. It's a code. It's an arbitrary designation by arbitrary pre-agreement. That's what a code is. A cipher is what most of us think of, and there's 2 basic techniques in hiding a message with a cipher. One is by transposing the letters by some scheme, so the unintended cannot interpret it, and yet the intended can receive the message. So one is by transposition, another is by substitution. Those are 2 basic things. Let's take a look at transposition ciphers. One of the simplest ones in the very early days was to wrap a paper around a staff, write the message longitudinally, along with other things. When you unraveled it, unless you had a staff of exactly that diameter, it didn't make a lot of sense to you. This was a very primitive, very crude, but very early form of transposition ciphers. There's a rail-fence cipher, columnar transpositions. To give you a feeling for this, if you took what's called the plain text, that's the message you're trying to deal with, and let's say you said, please help now, you can make a rail fence and then just slice it each level, and that's one way of transposing. Looks cute, but very easy to break, not very useful. Perhaps far more significant was what they called columnar transpositions. Let's assume your plain text was Cinderella, be home before midnight, okay? First thing you'd do is put that in columns. Then you'd adopt a keyword. And you'd alphabetize the keyword, and that would give you the order. This is just one way there are many ways to do this, but this would give you the order of the columns that you'd take. And so it would take column 2, then 1, then 4, then 5, then 3, then 6 with that keyword. And so the ciphertext, you take column 2 first, and just take it vertically. Then you take column 1 vertically, and column 4 vertically, and column 5 vertically, column 3, and column 6. The order being defined by your key word. And so, very simple concept, results in a reasonable form of encryption, not easy to break, but actually quite easy to break with modern computers. It's not as secure as it may seem at first. But along came, as we move through history, the famous Cardano grill. The idea was that you would be in possession of a grill with some holes in it, or you'd have the formula by which to cut a grill with those holes, either way. And if you took a message, and this is obviously a very crude message to give you an idea, for leverage, try only serials listed in Social Lovers editions. It deliberately is meaningless. But if you take the Cardano grill, if it's the right one, and you put that over the message, and take the letters that are exposed, it says, flee at once, all is discovered, okay?
Yeah,
by simply selecting from the message certain letters. This is the kind of code you find in the Bible.
That's amazing.
One of the simplest forms of this is simply to take every nth letter, every third letter, or every fourth letter, or every fifth, whatever. And with a computer, of course, you can try all of them and discover all kinds of hidden messages. What are their significance? We'll get to that. So this is the Cardano grill. A variation of this, which looks very, very complex, is where they would take a 6x6 matrix, and then they would allocate certain portion, a certain order, a scrambled order of the squares in the grill. And now this is one of those things that it would seem superficially that by the time you're through, you have an order.
I love
a
stuff
very
like
scrambled
this.
order of the 36 squares and the 6x6 matrix. It looks, the net result of that looks like it would be very hard to break. It turns out not hard to break at all if you realize the method. But the method that derives from all of these that we encounter, and there's been a lot published by, is what's called the equidistant letter sequences, which is really just a variation of the Cardano grill with the simplest possible formula, a fixed linear sequence of skipped letters. And
I love this stuff. This is provable science. If you go into the original Hebrew, you can do it. And they used to, for a while, think that was it. You had to use the original Hebrew, and it was only searchable that way. But recently, they've discovered that you can do the equal distant letter spacing in the English version of the King James. And as a matter of fact, it only works in that version from software that I've seen and a channel that I watched before, Truth is Christ. Yeah, that guy is amazing. Brandon over there, he goes into great detail about those things. You got to stop over there and check that channel out. That's Truth is Christ. And absolutely mind-blowing. But yeah, here we go, Chuck, into the codes again. Absolutely amazing.
what's interesting, very few people today are aware that taking this to the next level, a nonlinear sequence of more complicated things. The equidistant letter sequences are actually not very useful for secrecy. They're easy to find. But they can be used to authenticate a message because they're very, very hard to simulate. And part of the thing, let's imagine you're an operative, you're a spy in a foreign country, and let's assume that your hosts they may not know who you are, but they know there's a spy among themselves, so they create all kinds of false messages. So part of your problem is in the foreign country, you're getting messages, but you're not sure which ones really came from headquarters and which ones were contrived by your hosts. Well, one way what you'd do is you would look in your messages for content that you know only your contact has. You'd look for attributes of the source to authenticate the source. And interestingly enough, that's exactly what God has done with His Word. Since God has the technology to create us in the first place, does He have the technology to get a message to us? Of course He does.
Oh, yes.
The trick is, how does He authenticate His message? How does He let us know that it's really from Him and not some kind of contrivance or a fraud? That's called authentication. And we'll talk about some surprising ways God has done that within your text. Well, we've talked about transposition ciphers, but by far the more important category of ciphers are substitution ciphers in several categories. Monoalphabets, polyalphabetic, polygraphic, and some more advanced forms. The Caesar cipher is perhaps the simplest, used literally in those days. If you take the idea is very simple. If you take a sentence, you would take not those letters, but some formula of letters. Say, for an example, each letter would be substituted for the letter that was the third after it in the alphabet. So if that's the case, this is a fascinating session. It would translate into a series of letters that would be absolutely meaningless unless you realize that each letter really is alluding to a letter 3 steps before it in the alphabet. Do you follow me? Very simple, and yet unless you know that, it's pretty tricky. You'll also notice it's conventional, of course, to ignore the spaces. And so what you usually do is put them together, encrypt it, and then break the encryption into 5-letter groups to make it easy to count. So, because you don't want the spaces to be a tip-off in terms of what's called the parsing of the sentence. And there's other tricks we'll talk about in a minute. But all of these, in effect, are one-on-one mapping, where you take some alphabet and you simply one-on-one map it. And you can take a random assortment of letters and make each letter substitute. In this particular example on the screen, the word enemy becomes SWSHP. And because for the E, you substitute the S, and for the N, you substitute the W, et cetera, et cetera. And and now, as you can probably guess, one of the weaknesses of
Enemy. So we got S, W, N, E is S, M, is H, and Y is P. Just like F is R, O is I, and S is E. So we figured it out. Let's just keep going.
Of this is there's a one-on-one relationship between the substitution and the letter. If you know the frequency of use of letters, you can begin to start inferring which letters represent what. And surprisingly enough, if there's much volume in this breaks rather easily, rather straightforward. But there's some very, very dramatic things that started to develop in the 15th century. One of the things you'll discover, by the way, and I anticipate a little bit of the talk here, as history goes on, most of the kings in Europe had on their staff former Jewish rabbis. And many of the rabbis drew upon traditions that go way back among the scribes. And one of the things that's going on today is the rediscovery of some of the techniques that were prevalent back then. But Leon Battista Alberti invented the Viennese polyalphabetic ciphers. And these are like Caesar ciphers with interesting variation. If you took the alphabet, the idea is you take a key letter and have it line up with the plain text. For example, let's assume the key word is dog, and the plain text you're trying to translate, I'll just use Jim, a 3-letter example. You take the D on the top row, and you take the letter you're looking for vertically, and where they intersect becomes the ciphertext. And when you get to the O, you take the O on the top and the I on the horizontal, and where they intersect becomes the next letter. What's interesting about this destroys the one-on-one relationships between the letters. And the G and the M become the S and so on. And so this led to a whole revolution in cryptography because it led to what's called dynamic polyalphanumerics, where you let each enciphered letter become the key to the next one. And boy, that makes it pretty rough to break, where you have whatever the previous letter was is what you enter the top row with, and that becomes a code that's very, very difficult to break. And so now this led in 1585 to the only code that's ever been invented that is unbreakable. And it's called, a strange label, it's called the one-time pad. And part of the requirements are you need a key as long as the message. The key needs to be totally random and never reused. And that's why it has this weird name. The way to actually implement it is to print a pad of random letters that the sender and the receiver both need to use. And so it turns out to be very, very powerful, because you cannot break this kind of a code without those pads. And at the same time, it becomes very, very difficult to manage in a pencil and paper kind of world. With electronics, it's a whole other ball game, and we'll come to that in a minute. But modern ciphers, of course, use millions of continuing, changing cipher alphabets. And we'll talk about how you can communicate securely in modern terms in a moment. But then there's polygraphic ciphers. These are interesting because two letters are coupled together. Perhaps the most famous is what's called the Playfair Code, actually invented by Wheatstone, but because Lord Playfair, during World War, he was in love with this idea. I'll give you a simple version. You take the alphabet, take the I and J together, so you have 25 letters, so you can make a 5 by 5 matrix out of it. And you take your plain text, must come now, let's say, you break it into letter pairs, M-U, S-T, C-O, and so forth. And each pair of letters will form a rectangle, and you take the opposite diagonal of the rectangle. So the MU, you see, become RP, if you will, on the screen. The ST becomes the XY, and you adopt a... in each case, though, it's the letter pair that determines the letter pair. There is not a one-on-one correspondence with any particular letter. And that's where it gets its real power.
Chuck's amazing. He explains this like it's nothing. I got to go back and watch it like 5 different times. But yeah, he's absolutely in depth. That's not even the right word. I mean, he's below in depths. He's clear out to the other side.
This is a very, very powerful code used during the Boer War. It was also used by the German spies in the United States. Usually what you do before you create your matrix, you use a sentence or a keyword. And what they did is they used the King James Bible found in you can do this in any hotel room. You need no equipment. There's a Gideon Bible, and what they often would do, for an example, is use the book of Proverbs. It has 31 chapters, so you use the day that corresponds to the chapter. There's no chapter that has less than 12 verses, so you let the verse to the month, the chapter to the day, and for every date you have a sentence. You take that sentence, take the letters in the order they occur, and then fill in the missing ones to make your matrix. And you can do this with pencil and paper.
I'm not sure in this particular video he'll mention it, but Ivan Panin, I believe it was a Russian guy. He's the one who actually discovered all this equal distant letter spacing, IVANPANIN. And he thought the world was going to stop. He thought, oh my goodness, I found something here that nobody even knew was here. He tried to tell the world. They didn't care. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. I don't know if Chuck's going to mention it in this. He probably will, but if he doesn't, I just want to kind of put that out there.
It was a very, very effective code used for espionage purposes in America by the Germans during World War II. It's very simple, very practical, and relatively difficult to break. So, and of course, you end up with a ciphertext that's difficult to break because there isn't they're digraphs, they're letter pairs. There are more digraphs than there are letters. So it undercuts the monographic frequency analysis and it obliterates single letter characteristics and so forth. But then there's substitution ciphers, and the one we've missed is block substitution. If you take the National Bureau of Standards has a DES chip. We turned around Western Digital by putting this into a chip for a number of purposes. It uses 64-bit keys. It uses 17 stages of polyalphabetic substitutions alternated with 16 different transpositions. And so it really requires an exhaustive search of all 2 to the 64th power keys to crack it, and it's not really as strong as you'd like in modern today. You can take those things and operate on them mathematically, fractionate them, shuffle them, all kinds of ways to make them very, very difficult to communicate. There is, up till now, this is just general quick background for you as we get into some things here in a minute, but there's one thing you want to carry away from this, you want to remember, and that is an invention that occurred relatively recently. in what's called one-way keys, or so-called public keys. And these are asymmetric. See, it's normal in encryption to have a key or a code word the same for the sender and the receiver. That's the trick, is that you both need to share that keyword in some way of manipulating it. In 1976, Whitfield Diffie and Martin E. Hellman of Stanford University discovered or invented what's called an asymmetric key, a different key for encryption, a different key for decryption. They come in pairs, but the one for encryption you can publish publicly. If you know my public key, you can use that to send me a signal that no one else can crack. Even you can't crack it. You can encrypt it, but you can't crack it because it takes a different key to crack it. You follow me? It's asymmetric. That's why they call them public keys or one-way keys. There's a number of different styles of these from the Stanford tradition or the MIT tradition. But out of all of this comes a thing you'll hear about called PGP. It facetiously talks about pretty good privacy. It's actually very good privacy. And what has got the governments upset across the world is that this is in the public domain. The people invented this, put it on the internet. You can go to...
Yeah, this is back from 2003. So all you people out there who know a little bit about PGP, you know about where we are now compared to where we were in 2003, and it's still pretty good encryption. Not really, but yeah, here we go.
In any stationery store and pick up a software that allows you to do this. And it actually, if used properly, can cause you to enjoy pretty good privacy. And privacy makes governments and liberals very uncomfortable. And one of the things we plan to do as we think we're moving into darker times is to have training sessions for leadership to understand how to use the internet for secure communications. Because see, all these things, you want to understand what PGP is, and the internet is a whole different ballgame. See, all these models of communication from A to B implies a communications channel that's static. But if you're communicating through a totally, continually, dynamically changing database, which internet is, you can, in fact, mutually be referring to parts lists and other things that no one has any idea, and the only way they could break your code is to have a snapshot at the instant transfer of the entire internet, which of course is absurd. So out of that reality can come a form of communication to give you security from eavesdroppers of any kind. So there may be a time when leadership may want to take advantage of that. Well, of course, out of these techniques came devices. Alberti's cipher disk being an example of that. The Wheatstone disk that followed. Thomas Jefferson had his wheels, and Babbage had his difference engine, which led to the computer industry. The Enigma machines in World War II were a major factor in what was going on. Turing and von Neumann machines were invented to do that, and out of that, of course, came what we think of as the modern computer. And of course, modern computers are a whole different ballgame. You know, the technology in computers doubles about every 18 months, has for years. If you have a laptop with a Pentium 3 in it, and if you had had that in 1995, it would have been classified as one of the 500 fastest computers in the world. We laugh at that now, but at the same time, we don't realize how much speed, how much capacity has increased just in the last, 8 years? So that's an example, kind of interesting. But let's move on. Let's get at it now with this little quick survey. What about the Bible codes? We hear so much about that. And when they say Bible codes, what they mean, whether they know it or not, is a specific code called the equidistant letter sequence, or ELSs. There's a lot of fanciful stuff, a lot of stuff contrived that's been popularized in recent books that's too bizarre to be accepted, yet some of it is too impressive to be ignored. So let's steer a path through this. And I'm going to suggest to you some professional competence in cryptology is essential to adequately evaluate what we're getting into here. As early as the 16th century, Rabbi Cordovero said, the secrets of the Torah are revealed in the skipping of letters. And around that profound insight, a rabbi by the name of Weissmandel, after World War I, started to check in. Now, what do we mean by equidistant letter sequence? Well, here's just a contrived sentence to give you an idea. Dr. Rip Seppens, one of the pioneers here. Rip's explained that each code is a case of adding every fourth letter to form a word. In other words, if you take every fourth letter in the thing that's on the screen, it spells out another message, which in this case simply says, read the code. The point is, you can embed in a rational message another message of a totally different kind. The message might be reinforcing, which could be used for authentication, or it could be new information altogether.
Remember, these texts, the Torah, the King James 1611, the Torah way back, way back. And these codes have always been there. We're just now discovering these in the 2000s, 90s to early 2000s, and really getting, in depth to really start to understand these codes. And they're finding more and more all the time. It's absolutely just mind-boggling. Hopefully he's gonna go into the Ivan Panin thing here real quick.
Well, having said all that, let's take a look at the book of Genesis in Hebrew. Relax, we don't have to get into the Hebrew here, but if you go to the first how, and then you count 49 letters, you come to a Vav, and you count 49 letters, you come to a Resh, and you count another 49 letters, and you come to Hey. Now that happens to spell Torah. You say, well, that's kind of curious, but just a statistical, accent perhaps. With switching theory, you could probably calculate the odds. It's very, very rare, as you can imagine. But you're puzzled by this, so you go to Leviticus, nothing happens. But you get to Numbers, something even weirder happens. The same thing happens if you spell it backwards. Now, I have no idea how they discovered this. They must have had time on their hands. But, and when you go to Deuteronomy, you have the same equivalent type of thing, say. You got Torah spelled backwards.
I guess back then there was no internet. There wasn't any distractions, no phone to stare at 24/7. So I would believe you had nothing but time to, between sword fights and pox and plagues and rabies, and back then you could get a cut, die from a splinter, get an infection and die. So it wasn't easy, but yeah, I bet a lot of nights by the candlelight when people couldn't sleep, what better book to delve into?
And 49 letter intervals. You say, what on earth is this? Is too designed to be accidental. And what's the point? Well, you go to the middle book in the five, it's Leviticus. And now we're not talking 49 letters, we take the square root of that, 7. And we discover that in intervals of 7, you have the name of God. So we have Genesis and Exodus, it goes in the proper direction. Numbers and Deuteronomy, it goes backwards. And in the middle, you have Jehovah. In other words, the Torah always points to Jehovah. This is a design in the text. And yet the text is not contrived. It carries the most important narratives in the Bible. And so we look at this, and what do you make of this? I'm not sure. If that was all there's to it, it's just a curiosity, there's more. Why 49, by the way? That's a strange thing. It's the square of 7, of course. Well, in Leviticus 23:17, we know that 7 sevens are significant in the Scripture in several ways. One of the ways is at the Feast of First Fruits, they count 49 days, and the next one is the Feast of Weeks, the Hak Shavuot, which is the prophetic day of the church being born, and there's a lot more to it. I'll leave that for now. In the book of Ruth, which is one of the most interesting books of prophecy, a little 4-chapter book that unless you understand the book of Ruth, you will not understand the book of Revelation. But in Genesis 38, Judah and Tamar, remember, gave birth to Perez and Zerach. Boaz descended from Perez, okay? Boaz in book of Ruth marries Ruth. They had a son named Obed, who had a son named Jesse, who was the father of David. You with me so far? That's all by review. I'm sure you remember that. Well, in Genesis 38, these names are encrypted at 49-letter intervals in chronological order. The probability of just having the names there is in the neighborhood of, I think, 1 in 10,000, but the probability of having them in chronological order turns out to be 1 chance in over 800,000. So is this accidental?
Wow.
Is this just a coincidence of statistics?
No way.
There's a big debate on those things.
It can't be.
See, the Kabbalists, these mystical rabbis, had traditions as how you handle the text. And in the Renaissance period, as these techniques became very important to the courts of Europe, on the staff of most of these kings were some rabbinical expertise that translated this into the field we call cryptology. And as that matures, we start having mechanical aids that ultimately leads to the Enigma machines in Germany, the wartime computer development, and the rediscovery of the codes themselves. The loop is closed. See, in other words, it was that technology that created the codes that gets reflected ultimately in machinery, which now allows us to rediscover things that the ancient rabbis knew. Let's take some examples. Here's the word Israel. You'd think that'd be an important word in the scripture. If you look at the first 10,000 letters of the book of Genesis, from intervals from minus 100 to plus 100, minus numbers being, looking at it backwards, it only occurs twice. That itself is statistically astonishing, because statistically it should appear a lot more. Take the frequency of the letters and go through that analysis, you'd expect it to occur more than twice. Turns out it only occurs twice, and interestingly enough, in intervals of 7 and 50. To any Jew, that's very profound, because the Kiddush, the Sabbath observance in Genesis end of chapter 1, early part of chapter 2, is something they do every Shabbat, if you will. And of course, the Jubilee year is after 7 Shemitahs. So we have 7 and 50 are very significant numbers to a Jew. And it's interesting, the name Israel is in effect encrypted in the book of Genesis at that level. If you look at Genesis 2, the end of chapter 1 and the beginning of chapter 2, you have a section of text. It starts in Genesis 1:29. God says, "Behold, I've given you every herb-bearing seed," and so forth, and every tree, which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, and so forth. And that whole passage ends with verse 9 of chapter 2. "And out of the ground made the Lord God to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for the food, and the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge, good and evil." Those of you familiar with Genesis, that all sounds familiar. What you may not realize, that in the Hebrew text, you have encrypted in that passage the name of every tree that occurs in the Bible. And there's like 25 of them. And they're all in there, fairly tightly encrypted in that passage.
Absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, it's all encrypted right there. Absolutely mind-blowing. Yeah, it's Chuck. There's just really, I mean, there are a couple teachers out there like him, but no one quite exactly like him. He just absolutely blows my mind.
Now, what's the chance of that happening by accident? And what's interesting, aside from the statistics of the letters, the relevance of it. Here you have it's the passage about the trees. You have all the trees encrypted in that passage. The appointed times. Rabbi Hirsch said that the Jew's catechism is his calendar. And one of the most exciting studies, if you haven't done it, is to understand the Jewish calendar from its prophetic significance. And we have the heptadic calendar. We've got a week of days. We're all familiar with that. We have a week of weeks, the Shavuot, the counting of the 49. The week of months, the religious year. We have the week of years, the sabbatical year. And 7 weeks plus 1, 7 weeks of years, is the Jubilee year. That's the calendar, in which all land reverts to its owners.
Again, this is Chuck Missler with Koinonia House. I'm going to bring it up here so you can see where this is coming from. And yeah, I'm going to leave a link in the description for the entire video, but you can look it up if you just go to Koinonia House and then the fact 2003 Cosmic Codes Part 1. But yeah, this isn't even all of it. I'm going to cover a little bit of the rest of this right here, and then I'm going to go ahead and break it off. But for all of you who really haven't seen much of Chuck Missler's work, you need to check it out, because it's just absolutely amazing. I can watch this stuff over and over and over again.
All slaves go free, all debts forgiven. And the Jubilee year, of course, is alluded by Peter in his second sermon in Acts 3 as the time of the restitution of all things, of the second coming. So there's issues here. And but the appointed times, this in Genesis chapter 1, verse 14, it says, God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years." That's in the English. In the Hebrew, the word seasons is hamoyadim. The appointed times is what it really means. Well, if you search for this, it's kind of interesting. Oh, first of all, how many appointed times are there to a Jew? Well, there's 52 Sabbaths, 7 days of Passover, Shavuot, Yom Teruah, Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, 7 days of Sukkot, and the 8th day of Assembly. When you add that all up, it's 70. There are 70 appointed times in the Scripture. Well, when you take a computer and search the book of Genesis, there's 78,000 letters in the book of Genesis. Statistically, you would expect these letters to occur at least 5 times in the entire book of Genesis. It turns out it only shows up once, which itself is disturbing. But what's even further interesting, it is at an interval of 70, the number of appointed times there are, and it is centered on the very verse that we just read, where the idea of homoidim is introduced. So what's the chance of that happening by accident? No, it's designed. It's designed in. And so the odds against this, if that's happening by unaided chance, have been estimated by better than 70 million to 1. Now, does this reveal some new information? No, of course not. I wouldn't trust it if it did. But it authenticates the origin of the message itself. Because you're seeing what I believe are the fingerprints of the Holy Spirit. Isaiah 53, some people call it the Holy of Holies of the Old Testament, in which, and if you search that passage in the Scripture, you'll discover that he says, you'll find Yeshua is my name. And by the way, if you search on all the messianic prophecies in the Old Testament, you find encrypted behind that the name Yeshua. Yeshua is my name, and so forth. And Messiah, Nazarene, Galilee, Caiaphas, and that's all in Isaiah 53. There's a number of different words, all of which are interesting, but here's the one that really interests me. You also find encrypted in these 12 verses the names of everyone that were of relevance that were at the foot of the cross. You find all the disciples there: Peter, Matthew, John, Andrew, Philip, Thomas. You find 2 Jameses, not 3, because remember, one was not a believer until after the resurrection, the Lord's brother. But 2 Jameses, Simon, Thaddeus, Matthias. You find 3 Marys. That's itself interesting. One of them is encrypted, interlocked with John, by the way, Salome and Joseph. So that itself is provocative to me. But there's something even more astonishing. There is a name because of its letters that should show up very frequently in any Jewish text because the letters are so frequent. And it should occur like 50 times in the book of Isaiah. But it's conspicuous in that it doesn't appear here. And that's the name of Judas. The fact that Judas statistically doesn't show here is in itself astonishing once you understand the dynamics. So those are some. Let's shift a little bit and talk about some acrostics. You know, people say, the book of Esther has been controversial. You know, Martin Luther wanted it out of the Bible because the name of God doesn't appear in it.
All right, we're going to go ahead and leave it at that, but I'll leave a link in the description where the rest of this video and a lot more of Chuck's videos are, and I'm going to review a few more. I mean, they're just absolutely amazing. I can't get enough of it. But thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you stopping by to give this a little look. And I hope to see you back soon. Please give me a thumbs up and subscribe, please. And I really appreciate your time. And you guys have a great day. And we will see you again soon.
Quantum Stellar needs your help to make this content possible. Your contributions are greatly appreciated. Thank you.
You get that, Doug? You get that, Doug?